Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. I'm Richard Dubin, your host, and today we have a very, very interesting conversation we're going to be getting into with our very special guest, David Mark Quigley, who is an inspirational author. He's got all kinds of books. We're going to talk about a lot of the other things that he's involved in. His life, of course, reads like an adventure novel, rich with experiences that span continents, ladies and gentlemen, as well as disciplines. He was born in the rugged, I didn't know that there was a rugged landscape of New Zealand, but then again, I've never been there. So maybe he'll take us there as he journeys from farming and viticulture to becoming a renowned author and sculptor. Boy, I tell you what, I have a feeling, David, this is a fair definition of a Renaissance man. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for that, Richard. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Well, you have got a story that I think is really very interesting, and we're going to talk about that. But you, like many people, have overcome some, I guess you could say, interesting circumstances in your life. One in particular that I can't really relate to it specifically, but I can relate to it from the standpoint of my wife, and that is dyslexia. And I remember we had an organization here in Santa Barbara, which also we had in the Phoenix area where I was born and raised, where recordings for the blind and visually impaired. Well, in Santa Barbara, it was the blind, visually impaired, and the dyslexic. And I'm going, huh? Really? And then when I learned more about what dyslexia was, the inability to decipher the code, shall we say, just making it simple, I thought, well, that makes perfect sense. No, that works. That fits for me. Because when you can't read, in this case, you can't read the printed word or the digital word, however you want to put it, it makes it real difficult to gather information. And my wife, by the way, is an incredible researcher. She just, she's like me. I was asked to do a research project at a radio station some years ago. I spent a month researching it. When I came back to my boss, he says, I should have just told you, forget about it, because I had given him more information than he'd wanted. But I also give my wife the freedom. She didn't, and I'm sure you dealt with this too in school. You hated to stand up and read before the class. I did too, but mine was due to legal blindness. And it's embarrassing. It's frustrating. You get ridiculed. Even as you're trying to decipher the words, the letters, and so forth. And yet she now, and it's primarily because she has had a safe space and place to read and take the time to work through the words. And now she does it fluently. It's just amazing how far she's come in the years that I've known her. So I'm sure that was a big obstacle. And then here you go. Now you're writing books. You know, who does that?
Well, the thing with me, Richard, is I probably did have the genetic propensity to express dyslexia from my mother's side of the family, but I had a blunt force trauma incident where I damaged the left side of my mind, and so that probably exacerbated it. And so I have never passed an English test in my life, and I only actually read my first book when I was 23 years of age. And I could not wait to get out of school and leave it behind, because as you said, standing up to speak or read in front of the class was humiliating, and it was extremely stressful. I remember we had this one geography teacher, Fred Goodall, and Fred Goodall, he was actually an international cricket umpire But he was also a master in the school that I attended. I attended an all boys boarding school, and he would choose a boy to read aloud. I just couldn't do it. I had this fellow student behind me. His name was Andrew Russell. God bless him. He would whisper the text to me from behind, and I'd repeat it. And that was the only way I could get through it. It was terrible.
That's what they call the Cyrano de Bergerac solution. I love that. That's wonderful that you had someone like that that was so supportive of you.
Yes.
It's extraordinary too that you were you fell in love with the idea of telling stories. And in this case, you have a series of books, one of them which I have in my possession that was sent to me, that people can get through your website, which is David Mark Quigley, beg your pardon, davidmarkquigley.com. In terms of, can I put it in the context? They're animal stories, but it's more than that.
Well, yes, they're wildlife adventures. So basically what I do is I craft a story around an endangered animal and those people that are aggressively protecting them. Most of them are African endangered species. And so that's what the story entails. I write epics. They're normally about 150,000 words. And so, and from the royalties I receive, I have a wildlife foundation that I support wildlife foundations around the world from the proceeds or part of the proceeds of the books.
Mm. Well, then that's just, like I said before, I think we can safely say that you are a Renaissance man because you do so many different things and have done, traveled the globe. And I take it that those travels have helped you in creating these stories. Now, these are these fiction, or are these sort of taking facts that are, verifiable facts and weaving them into a fictional story?
Correct. So they are based in fact with fictitious characters. And so everything is in context, everything is factually correct. And so it is just the story behind it to get people involved, to think a little bit more about, hey, let's preserve some of these animals or assisting.
I think that people who have been resistant, for example, to the concept of climate change. And by the way, I don't talk about the science. I just say we need to clean up our home. And I think that what you are writing about is one of those elements that we need to not only clean up our home, we need to clean up our act.
Well, that's exactly right, because some of these keystone species that I write about, if they disappear, they're going to have a flow-on effect right through to us. And so it's very important that we preserve not only them, but allow them to preserve their habitat and to preserve that environment for us as human beings as well.
Now, you happen to reside in Florida. I don't know that I could live there, not for any political reasons, mind you, but I don't know that I wouldn't want to live in the Midwest either. I wouldn't want to live in Tornado Alley any more than I'd want to live in Hurricane Alley.
Right.
And yet, people, they choose to live where they live, and you deal with the issues that you deal with. For example, I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and of course it got hotter and hotter every year until I was 46. And the opportunity arose to move to Santa Barbara. I didn't know anything about wildfires. They used to call them forest fires, but now they're wildfires. Right. And in the 18 years that my wife and I have lived here, and she's a native Santa Barbaran, so she was familiar with the whole issue. We've probably been through 12, 14, or 16 different wildfires. Only one of those did we have to evacuate. And fortunately, we were never burned out. My heart goes out to anybody who did lose property, and God forbid life, through this process. But it doesn't matter where you live. I mean, down in, for example, if you lived in other parts of California, I mean, you deal with earthquakes and Hawaii. Setting aside what happened in with the wildfire that swept through, you're you're dealing with the ocean, and you're also dealing with volcanoes. Once again, I don't know. I don't know that there's necessarily a safe place to live. We sort of have to adapt to our surroundings. You also, in addition to where you live, you also you deal, as I mentioned earlier, in silver sculpture. Now, I don't know what the price of silver is, or whether it's pure in your instance. It can't be an inexpensive venture, but I'm sure that it isn't just sculptures for the sake of, hey, I'm going to make this and put this up above the mantle in the fireplace, assuming you have a fireplace. That this is another part of your art. Talk to us about that.
Yes, correct. So I've always been fascinated with precious metals, and silver in particular, because it seems to be the window to the soul. And so I was always collecting it. I was always collecting scrap pieces of silver. And then I decided one day that I wanted to increase the value of it. And so I had an affinity with African wildlife. So I decided, okay, I'm going to sculpt wildlife figurines out of silver. And so I set to it, and I made all my own equipment, and I basically learned it on the fly. And one of my signature pieces is a elephant, which is sculpted from one of the renowned elephants from Southern Africa. His name is Shahu. He was had one of the biggest pair of tusks in Southern Africa. And I sculpted him out of 9 pounds of solid silver. Wow. And I did it. And then I thought I'd better ask the experts to see if I could do it. And it turned out that I wasn't supposed to be able to do it. And so only because I made my own machines, and I did it without, I did it intuitively, was I able to do it. And so a lot of the sculptures that I have made, I use the lost wax form, depicts the animals that I write about. And so, but I'm sorry, Richard, I do put them on the mantelpiece. I cannot bring myself to part with them, even though they are of incredible value, and I have scores of them all over the place.
I love the fact that you dive into silver sculpture, doing it intuitively. Then you go to the people who are supposed to know how to do it, telling you, no, you shouldn't be able to do that. The phrase that came to my mind, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission.
That's exactly right. Yes.
I absolutely love that. That is fabulous. How large are some of these sculptures?
Well, like I said, the signature piece he's over 9 pounds. So he stands about 4 or 5 inches tall, and he's probably about 6 to 7 inches long. So he is a massive piece of metal.
That's a good size, to say the least. Now, I want to ask you about this foundation of yours. In the shadow of the acclaimed wildlife crisis, the statistics are grim and telling. And yet at the same time, I've heard statistics from the past, long before the Industrial Revolution, that millions of species over I'm not one that believes in the 6,000 year theory, but the millions of years that the Earth has been around, and the millions of species that have inhabited this planet, that millions of species have also disappeared. But at the same time, one of the interesting things I've noticed in some of the news stories of late, with the changing of the climate, it's the changing of the volume, if you will, of insects, as well as the mammals and the sea creatures, the pollution that's going into the sea that is finding its way inside of many of the seafood items that we choose to eat. So now we've got those microplastics. If we're consuming that the seafood, we're consuming the plastics. We got microplastics floating around inside of us, and we don't know the unintended consequences. Once again, we need to clean up our planet. Tell us about the goals of, or maybe it's a singular goal of the Quigley Foundation.
So the Quigley Wildlife Foundation was primarily set up so I could channel a portion of my royalties to wildlife causes around the globe. And so recently, I have a board of 5 directors. So we did some funding to 2 organizations recently down in Southern Africa. And I had just finished a book about the pangolin, the scaly anteater. And so very interesting, you talk about insects and such, because they are a keystone species for devouring the insects in certain habitats. And if they go, then we're going to be impacted by insect infestations because we don't have those then to clean them up. And of course, they are one of the reasons why the pangolin is the most poached mammal in the world is because of traditional Asian medicine and what they use the scales for. And so the book was written about that, and I just donated to the Hayward Foundation the Tiki Hayward Foundation in Zimbabwe, where they rehabitat pangolin back into the wild. And so the donation that we gave, the Quigley Wildlife Foundation, is going to be used for GPS trackers on those reintroduced pangolin when they go back into the wild. And so, and the other one was to the Kevin Richardson Foundation, and for his work that he does with lions, etc., down in Southern Africa. So that's what we try to do, and we try to help those causes that resonate with what I write about, and that are doing good work in those areas.
This is a fascinating conversation we are now having with David Mark Quigley and the Quigley Wildlife Foundation. We certainly hope that you'll pick up a copy of his book. You can go to his website, which we will be linked to. It is, of course, David Mark Quigley, Quigley. That's davidmarkquigley.com. We'll be linked to that website, and folks will be able to click on it as they're listening to this conversation. We hope that they will do that. What and when, or when and what was it that brought this concern to the forefront for you, to where you're writing these stories, fact-based fictional stories, doing these sculptures, and creating this foundation? That's just 3 of the many other things that I'm sure you're doing. That you were concerned, because it seems to me that one can take on the cause, for example, of caring for the planet and the animals, the various species that exist, when in reality, it isn't just the animals that we're talking about here. It's actually us.
Well, the pivotal experience of my life was when I'd left school. I went into the farming profession, and I traveled overseas for a number of years. And one of the places that I went to was Southern Africa. And I actually traveled originally playing rugby around the world. And while I was in South Africa, I injured myself and I couldn't continue to play. And so I went on a bit of an odyssey and traveled through the African wilds. And it was while I was in the wilderness that I had a catharsis change, and my life literally took on a different meaning. I remember I was on the top of a Land Rover. We were in Botswana. We were in a place called Zanin in the Chobe National Park. We came around this corner and there was a lion, a full maned lion, following a lioness in heat. He turned around and looked at our vehicle and charged us. The person driving the vehicle put it in reverse and reversed backwards at speed, but it was as if we were standing still. I was on the roof with two other people. They bundled down through the game viewing hatch and closed it behind me, leaving me trapped up there. But I was in my element. There was no fear, even though this incredible beast was bounding towards me. He smashed into the front of the Land Rover as if we were standing still, and I got the photograph of a lifetime. And it was then that I suppose my life changed, and I realized I wanted to do something good with my life. It was soon after that I read my first book. It was actually titled When the Lion Feeds by an author by the name of Wilbur Smith, a South African author. And even though it was excruciatingly slow to do it, it opened up a whole new world. And eventually, when I got back to New Zealand, I realized that I wanted to make a change. I needed to get over my dyslexia. And that's when I came up with this brainwave of writing a book. And so my first book, Scars of the Leopard, basically followed my travels around the world. But it was that book that taught me to spell. And lo and behold, during it, I found I could string a sentence together. And so by applying myself and learning to write, I was able to use neuroplasticity to change the cognition of my mind. I still think differently. I still have trouble breaking up words into syllables, but that event in Africa and writing the book changed who and what I was and am today. And so that was where it began, and that's what I put down to deciding to make a difference in the world. And because it was Africa that made that change, that's what I focus on, and that's what my Wildlife Foundation is focused in funneling funds back to that continent.
DavidMarkQuigley.com. David Mark Quigley is my guest here on the program. This is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And if you think that that's all that David does, think again, because additionally, he offers peak performance coaching, incorporating I Chi, hypnosis, full state, meditation, balance, quantum, biofeedback, breath work, and obviously the list could go on. And it's enhancing the lives of others through the comprehensive approach that he takes to well-being and personal achievement, which is, as many people know, that's right up our alley. We're wanting to change the world. Now, as a child in school, we were asked, what do you want to do? When you grow up, or what have you. And don't say you want to change the world, because that's too big. Just take little bites here and there. Well, now I'm an adult. I'm 64. I want to change the world. And I will do it by any means necessary that helps and supports the people of this planet, all the people, not just a select few. That's, I think, one of the things that we need to work through. And these techniques that you've incorporated, to me, they speak to the fact that you're willing to look at all different modalities, all different possibilities. And I'm just curious as to how you got started in this particular realm as well, because it does seem right up your alley, considering your story and the challenges that you have faced through your life. And I know that a lot of people who are listening can relate because we've all had these challenges before us, and some of us we've gotten stuck, and we want to get unstuck because we want to do more with our lives.
Well, one of the things that I realized that I needed to do is I needed to make a change, mentally because of the impact that dyslexia was having on me. And so when I wrote my first novel, Scars of the Leopard, I also studied for and received my diploma in clinical hypnotherapy. And I established a peak performance consultancy at that time. And while I was doing that and writing this novel, I realized the power of the subconscious mind and the interconnectedness that we have. And so one of the things that I based my peak performance consultancy on was regression therapy. I believed if I could identify what was holding people back and change that subconscious belief, and if we could use then, if those changes were made, we could then allow those people to perform at those peak levels. And so that's where it began. And so I started using and teaching subconscious triggers to be able to allow people to question and to question what was concerning them or where they wanted to improve and gain those answers. It's very interesting that you are in Santa Barbara, because I know Santa Barbara very well because I've visited it often. And my goddaughter went to Montessori there. And Montessori is recognized as one of those educational facilities that uses the flow state. And that flow state is what helped me with my neuroplasticity to change those cognitive functions that allow me to act and think as I do now. And so by using subconscious triggers, by using flow state, using those sort of things, people can achieve some incredible things. And so one of the things that I actually do or use is oracular wisdom. And so I use the I Ching, but I use it for the modern world. So the I Ching is the book of change, but in it, I found that it has distinct wisdom that can be used for the modern day. And so 14 years ago, I actually fell off a roof and had a horrific accident. And I was on my back for 6 months. And during that period, I studied the I Ching in depth because I was questioning my direction in life. And so I was always asking, what is my direction? What is my direction? And so I got this answer that kept coming back, turning back, turning back. And I didn't want to accept it. I knew what it meant. I didn't want to accept it. But eventually I embraced the answer. I went back to New Zealand, and for a 10-year period, I set up and ran the largest asbestos consultancy in the country while I was living in Florida. And so while it was a long commute, I was able to actually succeed at peak levels because of these subconscious triggers and asking the questions of the I Ching. If you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered. And so now people are coming to me for direction and guidance with the questions, the pertinent questions in their life, and wanting their answers. And so I assist them with that. And so it's through that interconnectedness that we have that I discovered when I set up my original peak performance consulting all that time ago, without interconnectedness, the power of the subconscious mind and those things that allow us to use our intuition and to, as I keep saying, perform at peak levels.
Well, I'm I'm familiar, for example, with a sort of a part of the practice of I Ching, and a lot of people will use what's called Tai Chi. And I remember my first exposure or experience, let's put it that way. I was familiar with what it was, but I had never really practiced it. So when I met my present wife, she was in the practice. She would go over to this one gentleman's house, and a whole group of people would go out into the backyard. And he had a beautiful, beautiful, lush green lawn, and we'd stand on that great grass in bare feet, touching the earth, and they had a little meditation music going on. And the gentleman that was leading it, his name was Sunyata Saraswati. He is a co-author of a book called Jewel in the Lotus. Sadly, he's since passed on, but nonetheless, I was there with her. I didn't know the movements. I'd never done the practice. So I'm standing there and I'm looking at everybody and I'm trying to follow them. And he finally comes over to me and he says, "Stop." He says, he says, "Don't try to follow anybody else. Just let the music and the energy guide you. Just flow with that. Just however you choose to move, you move." And it was like, oh, once again, a safe space. Do you find that that may be part of the issue we have, especially, I'm going to say, in this country with what we are dealing with as a country, that it's hard to find a safe space and a safe place to not only be who we truly are, but to share what's real about who we really are. And again, we're not talking about the superficial stuff, like how much money I make and what political affiliations and what religion. Those are all superficial. About getting down to the core of who we really are, and that is connected, if not a piece of, not just a part of, but a piece of the divine. And meditation in particular, because we promote on this program going within during the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, going into that quiet, peaceful, calm space and listening to that still small voice. And there are still people in this world today, in this country especially, who it's woo-woo, it's of the devil, it's whatever it is, they're opposed to it. And in fact, if they would just give it a shot, because we need to learn about ourselves. We need to know who we really are deep down inside, the real us. Do you see that we need to, one of my other guests talks about a sacred space, not a holy place, but sacred. There's something different between those two words. And she likes the word sacred. What are your thoughts?
Well, really everything you've just said resonates with me, Richard. And I think what it is all about is balance. And so us personally and our environments that we live in are looking for balance. And so if you can tap into that balance or tap into that balance for somebody else, you can basically help guide them to answer those questions that they're searching for. As I said before, if you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we just need a little bit of assistance to gain that answer. It may be insight that we need, or it may be direction, or it may be an impetus that we need. And so with my diploma of clinical hypnotherapy, the state of hypnosis is very similar to a meditative state. And so you can see the chair behind me. This is where I meditate at 5 o'clock every morning, because I want to become centered and I want to become balanced. And so by doing that, it allows me to tap into that interconnectedness that we all have, so I can resonate with those people that come to me that have those questions that they want answered. And so, but the way that I look at it, Richard, is I dive very deep into why and how. And
Mm-hmm.
so I will look, we obviously don't have time to go over it today, but we can talk about our interconnectedness from a quantum mechanics point of view, from a social behavior point of view. I mean, Carl Jung is one of the ones that he talks about the universal consciousness. And so there are all sorts of mirror neurons, those sort of things that are science-based that support what you've just said and that I talk about is balance. And so those people that say, you know, supporting the devil or whatever are then ignoring science. And so because if you dial it down to the level of the atomic or subatomic particles, all they're looking to do is balance, looking for balance and self. And when they get out of balance, they're trying to get back into balance. And so those questions that we have as human beings, all we're trying to do is we're trying to rebalance. And so, and I know I'm repeating it, Richard, but if you can articulate a question, you already have the knowledge to have it answered. Sometimes we just need a little bit of help, a little bit of assistance.
Well, of course, I've even heard the saying that every question has the answer within the question. And
Correct.
and as you're articulating and talking about connectedness, it's rather interesting. I was in the process, as we are speaking today, of editing my book, getting ready to publish in September. And I wrote this: remember, we are connected, and our actions do affect the lives of those around us. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Now, I think I'm going to have to credit Einstein for that one. This is not a choice, it's a fact. Drop a pebble in a still body of water, and when the pebble hits the surface of the water, it creates ripples that expand outwardly. And then I go into an example of, as a kid, we lived next door to a family that had a pool. It wasn't a huge pool, but it was a below ground pool, or in ground. And I loved doing cannonballs. But my family hated it. They said, cut it out, stop it, knock that off. And yet I would do that. Now, what was interesting was, if I did it, I want to say right and wrong, in addition to creating waves that would flow right over the edge of the concrete edge of the pool, the water, the whole, the vacuum, or the void that is created when I hit the water comes crashing into my head. So I kind of got my comeuppance, but it is absolutely true. And that there's another element to it too. And I love Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, talks about this, even from the quantum perspective. In addition to us all being connected, and it's been proven obviously by science, we are all made. This is where you're going to have to let go of whatever preconceived notions you have of the other person as to why you don't like them, because we're all made of the same stuff, both materially and spiritually. And that seems to be lost on a lot of people, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think really, Richard, in today's society, we could look at spirituality as needing to be practical spirituality.
Yeah.
And so, the I Ching talks about heaven and earth, but it's not a religious text at all. Heaven is classified in the ancient text as the creative, initiating action energy in the universe. And earth is the supportive, responsive universe that, with those two coming together, will help balance human action. And so that's all it is. That book of change is looking at balance between the three major energies within the earth: the initiating, creative, action energy, and the supportive, responsive, and our human action. And then, if we can know that balance, or the current situations and our future potential, then we can reinforce good fortune and avoid misfortune. And so that's all a lot of us want to achieve, because
Mhm.
what is that? All it is peace. We're just looking for peace. But sometimes we need to ask those hard questions to find out what that peace is, or what we really want to achieve in this world.
Hmm. I like what you're saying there. I was asking hard questions back in the 80s and early 90s while working for a Christian radio station. Now, the questions I was asking were all in regards to doctrine and dogma, but I couldn't stay away from the questions because the answers that I had been given made no sense to me. But as time went on, and I still remember when I was 20, and sharing my philosophical viewpoint on whatever it was we were talking about around the table, someone there, older than me, said, "Oh, Richard, you're wise beyond your years." And at first I thought, well, thank you very much. That's very nice of you to say. But I got to thinking about that. Okay, so as I get older, do I catch up with that wisdom, or will I always be wise beyond my years, as long as I continue to observe and live my life and question things and so on and so forth? It's very interesting to talk about this, wisdom, quote unquote. When they say wise, they are referring to wisdom. I'd like to think. So I'm curious about the subject of wisdom, because that's been a topic that's come up many, many times on this program. Talk to us a little bit about your perspective, and maybe this is tied into that whole issue of within the question there is the answer, or if you can ask the question, the answer is in there somewhere. Talk to us about our wisdom or our connectedness to the source of the wisdom that we, in many cases, we live by.
Well, I've done thousands of regressions with people, and when and I generally dealt with high performance individuals. And so when you have the CEO of a business sitting in your chair and you are regressing them to try to identify what's holding them back, and they start recounting vivid memories that do not relate to this particular world, and you start giving up having firm ideas of how we are made up and how we are connected and our interconnectedness. And so I learned very early on that we are all connected in a very unique way. And so because of my unique cognition, because of my dyslexia and what I did to overcome it, I was able to use that intuition, tap into their subconscious, and help them find the balance or the interconnectedness or the meaning that they were looking for. And so all of us have access to that wisdom, and that wisdom resides within all of us, but also resides without of us as well. And so it is because people generally know right from wrong, and people know what should be done in certain circumstances. Some do it, some don't. And so a lot of that wisdom is ingrained within us because it could have come from lifetimes ago. It could have come from the very essence of where we evolved from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've witnessed too many examples to ignore reincarnation and those type of things. I don't really talk about it much, but there is a distinct evolutionary wisdom that is within all of us. And so it is a matter of tapping into that wisdom in the way that resonates with each of us. And it's finding how that resonates. And so I'm just a conduit to assist people to do what they already know, but craft it in a way that they can understand. And so, yes, the interconnectedness and the wisdom that you asked me about is within all of us, but it's also outside of us as well. And so I suppose that's where the interconnectedness comes from. And I always like to know the why, so I can explain it to people. And that's where, if we dive down the rabbit hole of talking about quantum mechanics, we can actually come up with scientific evidence that supports that interconnectedness and that common wisdom. Well, no wisdom is common, but
Right.
that joint wisdom.
I suppose the commonality is the fact that we have access to it regardless. And
Correct.
I found it true too, and I don't know about you, as much as I tend to, as on this program and others, and in other conversations, share my perspectives, my observations, and so forth, things that I have learned. I remember something my brother said to me, and he's 2 years younger than I. We were walking in the desert after a family reunion at I believe it was the Elks Lodge between Florence and Coolidge, Arizona. And I was sharing with him where I was coming from, and he turned to me and he says, "Well, Richard, it's about time that you got it." And I said, "Well, it's not when you get it. It's that you get it." And he and I have had conversations since then where I have found that, we are from, and again, this is now on the lower base levels of living here. Politically, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. However, I recognize, even to this day, neither of us is right or wrong. We just have a different perspective. And he will always be my brother. I just can't, it makes no sense to me how people can disown one another over those kinds of things, religious, political, economic, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, are you kidding me? They're your blood. Get over it, kind of thing. And I love my brother. He has done some things for our family and specifically my parents that I am so proud that he was able to do it. I wish I could have. I'm not envious, but I am proud that he was able to take my parents. He worked for Disney, so he was working on the Chinese Disneyland, and he took my parents to China one year. And that is so cool that in addition to his ability to travel the world and work in France or China or wherever it was they were building an amusement park, but to take my parents and let them have an opportunity to explore the world, I just think that is so cool. So there is no question that I am very, very proud of him in that respect, that he was able to do that. One of the things that well, let me share this with you folks first. David Mark Quigley is my guest. DavidMarkQuigley.com is the website. We certainly hope that you will pick up, if not one, maybe the entire series of books that he makes available to you on his website. And his website, as I said, is DavidMarkQuigley.com. He has a series of 4 books, at least these are what are on the website. One you've already mentioned, Scars of the Leopard, The Last Rhino, White Gold, which by virtue of the picture has to do with an elephant, and African Lion. And I think it's African Lion that I have on my bedside table that my wife picks up. But you folks can get a copy of African Lion, a digital copy, if I'm correct, by going to the website and going to the tab labeled books, and then scroll down midway and you'll see free download African Lion, How the Barbary Lions Escaped Extinction. There's a link down there. You click on it, download a free copy, and read this wonderful story of the African lion by David Mark Quigley. David, we as always, we always run out of time on this program, and I always hate to say goodbye, but I would love to have you back to actually talk about some of these aspects. You said that earlier. You said we really don't have the time in this kind of a context, but maybe what we could do is take one entire program and dedicate it to this process that you have created. And I don't know if it was having to do with the free state or one of the other modalities that you utilize that can help people to, I don't know, maybe get in touch with that inner wisdom that might unlock some of the doors that they have kept closed from themselves or to themselves, that maybe they might be able to step out of that and say, you know what, darn it, I can. Because I will tell you that I'm in the process of 3 different ventures, even as we speak. Number one is my book, getting it finished. Been working on it. The impetus was my second wife here, and her cancer. I'll call it a cancer scare back in 2001. So that's how long I've been working on it. And then there is we'll call it the rededication of the vows with my wife and I, making our relationship, shall we say, official. That's the second thing that's taking place in the month of June. And also going through the process of clearing a lot of the material world that's around me. Like in my studio, you wouldn't believe the number of books I have. Maybe you would. I've been doing this a long time. Talk to us a little bit about these. We'll call it it's been said it's a to-do list, and I know some people will have multiples. I said, look, if I had multiple to-do lists, then I have to have a to-do list to remind me of the other to-do lists that I already have. So I'm going to keep it to one. And and especially in terms of this aspect of clearing out what we don't need anymore, not just specifically or not just the material world, but on the inside. Talk to us about that.
Okay, well, one of the things that is important for anybody is they've got to want to clear up that clutter. And again, it begins with a question.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you suggested coming back again, which I would love, because then we can dive down the rabbit hole, and
Okay.
we can talk about the main modality that I use, while people have viewed it as being esoteric, is actually based in science.
Okay.
And so,
well,
yes.
I'll tell you what, because of what you've just said, I'm going to stop you there because we're coming close to time here. I should have never asked such a wide open question. Let's have you back to talk about that very thing. Okay.
That'll be great.
I'll be honest with you. I can't thank you enough for being a part of this program, for what you're doing, not just for the planet, but for the people, and trying to help them. And I hope that people will go to your website, davidmarkquigley.com. As I say, we will be linked to it. I do have 3 final questions that I want to ask you, that I ask all of my guests. But before I do, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And we are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. That's our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. And then Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. following the news. We stream live at those times at richarddugan.com, and we podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and other locations. And we're on YouTube, where you can not only listen to but watch these conversations. I hope you'll subscribe as well as click notification so that when I put up another conversation, you will be notified and you'll be able to tap into that and listen in. We also ask that if you can support the work we are doing financially, we would be so grateful. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. Richard@richarddugan.com is the email you'll want to enter when asked, to whom are you sending this? Richard@richarddugan.com. And we thank you for those who have helped and those who will help. And also spend some time going within and listening to that still small voice and tapping into that inner wisdom during this, the decade of perfect vision. And with all of that being said, we of course thank you, David, for being a part of the program. And the first of the three questions that we have for you is, who is David Mark Quigley?
Well, David Mark Quigley, I went on a podcast recently and I was asked, was I born or made? I'm a combination because I have, if it wasn't for my dyslexia, I would not be the person that I am. So I look upon it as a skill and it has allowed me to achieve incredible things. So who am I? I am a dyslexic and I'm proud of it. And from it, I have been able to create an incredible world for myself and others.
What is it that gets you up in the morning?
What gets me up in the morning is the motivation of actually building something new every day. Starting with nothing and ending with a creation.
And finally, what was your best day?
My best day is probably today. And also the opportunity to speak with you and talk about inner wisdom.
And we're going to do that in our next program when we get together again, and we'll set that up after this one. And I thank you once again for joining us. And again, I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.